check that earlier. Just want to make sure it's all good. Okay, so I'm just looking to get everybody to raise their hand. Let me know that you're here, you're ready to go. Because I've got some important news that I got to share right at the top of the session. So I need to make sure everybody is here and paying attention so you can, in fact, get the news, which could potentially be really confusing if you don't know the news. So always important to let me know if you've stepped away, certainly at the beginning, if you're not available right at the beginning. So I'm going to go ahead and put the hands down. So I don't know that this is necessarily going to impact this class, but PMI changed their materials last Wednesday. We found out about it, I think Friday. So if you accessed the PMI material, so we talked about accessing the course at PMI on Thursday. So if you went and accessed the course and downloaded or otherwise accessed their materials on Thursday, you're good because that was the day after they made the changes. If for some reason you had gone in earlier and downloaded them before the 15th of July, you're going to need to download them again. So any downloads after the 15th of July are the updated materials. There were some sweeping updates, which has gotten me just a little bit on the wonky confused side. So if it sounds like I'm a little unsure at points, that's why. Still kind of working through the changes. But I got to tell you, they were really good changes. They were things that needed to happen. And it's just going to make our lives so much easier when we get to those topics. But they changed things from lessons 2 through 7. So again, they made that change last Wednesday on the 15th. So any access after that is fine. Before that, you'll need to download the new copy. So any questions about that? Okay, so I don't see any hands up. So before we get started in our lesson today, and this is stuff that I did point out when we did I tried to do like a demo of the PMI materials. Included in there, along with the learner handout, there's a glossary and there's a workbook. Now the glossary, I'll tell you what to do with that in the final session. So you don't have to do anything with it now. And the workbook is, again, it's a PDF presentation of all of their slides in one document with areas to take notes. It's hundreds of pages long. You don't need it if you don't want to use it. So just things to note about it. We're not going to require you to use it. Again, if you just get access to the presentations for your pre-reads, that's all you really need. So there are also the spotlight videos. If you remember, they're underneath the course. Well, they're on the left-hand side. If you kind of look toward the bottom of the left-hand side, there's next steps, and above that are spotlight videos. I am going to be directing you to spotlight videos to go view. Recommend some to view as they become relevant to topics, and then some we will see actually in the presentations. There's a handful. I think less than a handful these days. And you won't be able to view them from your presentation, but I will be showing them, but they're always available at Spotlight Videos. There's short little videos on different topics. There are also a couple of slides that are interactive discussions. We are not going to be doing those discussions, and it's really just due to the time constraints we have in our 24-hour class structure. Because they wrote their materials assuming they were going to be used in a 40-hour boot camp. We just simply don't have all that time, but you are still absolutely going to get everything you need to be successful for the test. There are some quizzes and activities that are embedded. We will be doing those in class. You don't have to do them outside of class. So as they kind of show up in the presentations, we'll do those activities. And I always encourage people to take advantage of those things, to challenge what you understand and learn more from that. So that's a little bit about what to expect with the PMI materials. I'll be pointing some other things out along the way as well. So any questions before I get started? Charles, did you have a question? Your hand is up.
Yeah, thanks. I'll try and be brief. First of all, I want to reconfirm, I think I know, but what we're supposed to be doing between classes, for instance, session 3, we were told to do the Agile Foundation focus area test. We were supposed to have done that before today. Also, on reading for next session, we were supposed to review the PMI lesson 2 and 3, right? Read those all the way through and review the stakeholder performance domain in the PMBOK. Is that correct?
Ish. I'm going to give you an ish on that one. So the focus area test for Agile Foundation is not related to today. It was related to the prior session. So it was just like a reinforcer of our Agile topic. Most of them do reinforce something of the topic we discussed. The pre-reads were all of lesson 2, part of lesson 3, and the stakeholder performance domain. So like you were really close, but just to kind of tweak it a little bit, you weren't expected to read all of lesson 3 because we're not going to get through it today. Certainly, we're just going to get into it today. So
were we supposed to have completed the initiating and stakeholders tests, or the focus area test and the performance domain test today, before today?
No.
Okay, good.
You will do it after the class, though.
All right, cool. And then the other thing, real quick, if I may. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, so the online tests are done after we're done with the live session. So the session numbers imply the live session of the recording, and then you do those tests, and then you do the pre-read for the next session.
Okay, great. So the other thing I just wondered about, again, I don't want to take too much time, but the test results that you said we only have to do 30% on and whatever, do you see the results of those tests? Are those available to you and so on, or are they just sort of a gate to go on to the next thing? Or, I mean, what are those for? And then the other thing is, when we're doing the tests, and particularly during the PMP cert, not that we'd have time for this, but are we allowed to refer to external resources such as the PMBOK while we're doing either the tests or the actual cert exam?
So no external materials. So it's not open book. Everything comes from your brain, because it's more about understanding how to apply the things than knowing a process, right? You need to understand when and how to potentially apply it based on the scenario that they give you. These are not tests of what you know. These online tests that you're taking, they're not tests when I'm not testing what you learned. And I can see them, but I don't, because they're a challenge for you to reinforce the topic we just discussed, or a part of the topic we just discussed. In large part, it's that. So that's why you don't have to pass them, because we're not testing what you know, because you don't know much. And you just have to walk into these tests as something that's going to help you kind of think through a little bit, and reinforce the topic we just discussed, or a portion of the topic we just discussed. So that is the purpose of, I refer to them as online activities in the form of questions, because we're not testing what you know. So don't think of them as tests. You don't have to pass them. They're a learning tool that you need to do in the cadence I've given them to you, because that's how you get the most out of them. And do only the homework I've given you and nothing else. This is plenty. And you gotta trust the process. There's a method to my madness. There is a reason why we do it this way. This has been successful for many, many, many years. So don't think of them as tests. Just think of them as an extension of the day, and you're learning more stuff from it and having to think, more critically about things.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Carl, I can open your line.
Hey, good morning. Good afternoon,
I'm doing well. Still morning for me, so you were good either way.
Okay, quick question. So he did go over the test that we take. What if we timed out? We didn't score high. Can we retake the test by any chance? The quiz?
Okay, so you don't have to score high. You just need 30% or better.
Okay.
Yeah, that's all you need. But if you didn't get through all the questions, I'd say take it again, so at least you get the advantage of the questions you missed, and you'll be able to get through the first ones faster because you just took it. Because It's not about scoring and passing tests to earn anything. You just have to take the test. We say 30% or better because that tells us that you actually attempted it, as opposed to, I'm sure there were people back in the day that just went through and maybe answered C for all of them.
Right.
quickly just so they could get credit for it. So we make you actually have to work for it.
Gotcha.
Yeah, but
Okay.
I do not expect passing. That's not going to happen
Okay.
for a long time.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. So at this point, we do need to get started. I don't want anybody to feel like I'm shutting down your question, but I don't see any hands. So I'm going to assume we can get started on the materials. So lesson number 2, well, and generally speaking, their materials, the PMI materials, generally, but certainly not exactly, kind of roughly follow a progression of a project. And some of the things that we would want to consider early on, some of the things that happen during the project till we get to the end where we close it. So this first one is, I know it's a huge surprise. We're going to talk about the big picture. So these are just kind of basic concepts that the rest of the course is built on, and they are going to help to explain what it means to be a project management professional. So in this particular lesson, a lot of what we're going to cover will probably feel familiar. And that's because really project management is it's often just common sense. And you're likely doing many of these things already, even as we get through the rest of the materials. Some of the stuff we just kind of zipped over in our PMBOK and Agile introductions. With that said, what we'll see aligns with how PMI expects things to be done. And some of that may be new or different than your experience. So the goal is to get you used to that approach and get more comfortable living in PMI land. Now, PMI bases its guidelines on input from project managers around the world, and you can be a part of that. So it's not just, a governing body of like 3 people that are telling us how to be. It's, people putting in their experience in these practices for good practice. And so they matter for the exam, certainly, and we're going to eventually see how all of this aligns to what you need to know for the test in the exam content outline, but they're also really useful in real work, when they fit the situation. So now we're going to review some of the things we did discuss in a foundational way in the PMBOK. We're going to start layering in some more, but we're starting again with that, I think, an elementary question of what is a project. So PMI's official definition of a project is that a project is a temporary initiative in a unique context undertaken to create value. And this is kind of new, kind of buffed it up. I learned it as, a temporary endeavor with a definite start and end that intends to create something unique and will create value along the way. Part of that is to create value for the organization. So that means projects are unique. And so they're different in some distinguishing way from just doing things like in routine operations over and over again, even if you've done a similar sort of project before. So for all of this, what I'd like to clarify here is this idea of unique and kind of the like the gradient of unique by introducing the example scenario we're going to be using throughout the course. So in our example scenario, we are a construction company and we build residential houses. And we are so cheap. We've only ever purchased one set of blueprints. So we're basically building the same house over and over and over again. However, because, well, it sounds like the same thing, every time we build a house with this blueprint, we build it on a plot of land. And every plot of land is ever so slightly or greatly different than any other plot of land in the universe. And the home buyers, they're going to have, they're going to have unique needs. They're going to have their own preferences. So even though we're building the same house over and over again, it is always in its own way unique. So every house we build is a project. So it has a definite start and end. Because it's temporary, eventually it's going to end. It creates something unique, and it does create value for the organization because this is what we do, build these houses. So each house is a project. I'm going to skip this activity, always goes sideways, so I'm just going to keep going here. Then there's the definition of project management. And project management is how we apply our knowledge, skills, tools, and techniques to perform a project to create value for the organization. So that means, with project management, we plan, lead, and coordinate the work, and the people, the resources, the risks, and our stakeholders involved, so that our project's going to deliver its intended outcomes within its constraints. I just want to talk about this for a second. So back in the day, and I'm talking way back in the day, projects were performed and they were often, over budget. They often went way too long, and we often ended up with stuff that wasn't particularly useful. So project management as a practice really came about in the 1960s to provide a consistent or repeatable structure, successful structure for managing projects. And PMI credits NASA's Apollo missions to the moon as one of the first projects to use a formal project management structure. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say they were pretty successful. So it's been around for a minute. Now, over time, it's evolved to what's current in project management these days, as project management has evolved. The PMBOK originally came out as a white paper back in 1987, then later in book form in the early 90s, up to today, where we're in the 8th edition. So we have seen this evolution of project management over time, but the ultimate goals, would be to create and provide, skills and good practices and knowledge for managing projects in a successful way. So a little bit about project management. Then we have life cycles and development approaches, which may sound familiar because kind of talked about it before. Now, project life cycle is a series of phases that a project passes through from its start to its completion. That's its entire life cycle. It's just the entire project from beginning to end. Like when we build a house, which we know is a project. We've already covered that. We've already decided that. It'll likely start with the initial contract we sign with the home buyers. That's going to lead to the start of a project, which will continue until the house is built and we hand the keys to them at the end of the project. After that, the house goes into its ongoing operational state and the home buyers are going to be responsible from there. So we're just going to move on to the next thing because the project's over. So your project's life cycle provides a basic framework for managing the project, and that's really regardless of the development approach you ultimately decide to use to do the work. So in terms of the structure of a project lifecycle, it could look something like this. Initially the organization has an idea, and they need to make sure any proposed project is aligned with the organization's mission, because it needs to support the organization. That then leads to the creation of a business case by the business to help justify the selection of it as a project based on the business need that was identified and the investment potential. If a business case is accepted to become a project, it kind of gets transformed into a project charter. And then the project charter is going to be the official document that identifies the project manager, and it grants authority to apply organizational resources to start and perform the project. So once we have an approved project charter, the aspects of the project, along with the project and product related activities, get planned. And this is going to be a critical phase of a project, and it can take a lot of effort and time to organize, which would be impacted by how we decided to do the work. Then we execute the plan based on the decisions we made in planning. And at this point, we need to keep the team focused, motivated, and empowered to efficiently produce the project deliverables. So when the project objectives and the acceptance criteria have been met, we close the project. And then throughout the project, but especially while the team's doing the work, we're going to be monitoring the results to make sure that the project is meeting milestones within the project schedule. It's also falling within cost and quality constraints. Or we'll take action to control it and get it back to the planned tolerances. And just something to bear in mind, this is just a generic example. An actual project may go through more or less steps than this. We talked about the product lifecycle. A product can be a part of the project as its output or just a component item that we're creating along the way. Now, product management is about integrating the people, processes, and systems to support the creation and maintenance of a product through its product lifecycle. And product owners are going to organize the initiatives like projects, programs, and portfolios to maximize the value of the product from its initial ideation and introduction through growth stage, through an eventual end of life or retirement of the product. And so these projects are the initiatives undertaken within the product's lifecycle to create and sustain the value. We did introduce development approaches in our PMBOK introduction, so it's how we choose to do the work to create the deliverables, which can be predictive, adaptive, or hybrid. So this means your development approach is not the project lifecycle. The project lifecycle is the end-to-end life of the project. To structure the work, the development approach is used to perform the work. So your project lifecycle is a progression through a series of developmental stages, and you can just visualize a project from its start to its completion. That is its complete lifecycle. So to structure the project lifecycle, we need to understand how we're going to do the work to create the outcomes and when we're going to deliver results or value, which can also impact the development approach we choose. So it'll impact how we structure the project, but all and when deliverables are made or are delivered, when value is delivered, which can drive the development approach. Sorry for the okay, so traditional approaches to project management are predictive. So back in the day when we were talking about project management, it was typically, create the plan, work the plan. You can also see it referred to as like waterfall or plan driven. As much as possible, the project needs, requirements, and constraints are understood at the beginning of the project, and plans for the project scope, schedule, and cost are developed accordingly. Now, the plan is typically broken up into phases, and then the work is performed in a linear way as planned. So the plan drives the project forward. So the more well planned, the more predictable and controlled the project is going to be. Change is possible, but it's considered and controlled through a process that helps ensure the continued viability of the project. Risk is also proactively considered and, well, not also, but it is proactively considered, but it would also be managed methodically. Now, in the PMI materials, they have some icons that I want to point out, and that is the icon that they use to represent the development approach that they're discussing on the slide or on a part of a slide. So this relates to predictive. And so the icon, I think it's pretty descriptive. We do predictive projects in a linear way in phases. So it's linear in phases. The work in an adaptive approach is performed in an iterative or repetitive way to develop the results. We do this when there's substantial uncertainty or complexity that can't fully be planned in advance. So we're going to need to figure out how to satisfy those needs. Adaptive projects typically structure the work in short iterations for specific needs where the team makes decisions and they do the work based on knowledge and skills and integrating regular customer feedback. So it creates these value delivery feedback cycles at the end of each iteration. Now, an adaptive approach to doing the work can be used on the entire project to develop one result at the end. We would just be delivering components of it throughout. And while it's not common, it's important to be able to adapt the development approach to the needs of the project. Its icon for adaptive, it's got the little sprockety thing in the middle, and it's got like the stuff churning around it. It's change driven. Now, every time I see this, I think about that little plastic piece that you put in the middle of a 45 record so you can play it on a record player. And if you have no idea what I'm talking about, that's totally fine. But if you do, you're never going to unsee it. You're welcome. Now, according to PMI research, and I think it makes total logical sense, most projects are actually hybrids. So it's important to be able to recognize when it's going to be best for your project to utilize a hybrid approach. So hybrids are absolutely going to require tailoring. So adapting the project processes of the work to be done based on what we can know about the project work. Teams can use combinations of project approaches and methodologies, combining the reliability of plan-based approaches with the flexibility of adaptive development cycles. They can often leverage modular development of deliverables or enable organizations to put more than one team to work on a project, making projects more structured and delivering value sooner. There's also an icon for hybrid. I remember hybrid blends predictive and adaptive. Its icon blends predictive and adaptive. Ta-da. So these are just some diagrams of some common types of hybrid project approaches and how you can blend them together to create a hybrid. These approaches are really most appropriate when you need both the control of predictive and the flexibility of adaptive in the same initiative or within the development of a product. So there are so many different ways to organize a hybrid project, but I want to give you some examples from that visual we just saw. So the team might choose to use an adaptive approach to create a software program. And then once that's done, they'll use a predictive approach to plan the training and the steps for the rollout. So the first part's going to require adaptive, the second part's going to require predictive. Or we could do the approaches in parallel. So maybe on a project, we have a team using an adaptive approach to create a software program, while another team is managing the planning and installation of the IT infrastructure. So you have to do it in parallel so they're ready to deploy together at the same time. So you have different teams using different approaches based on the needs of what they're developing. Or for the next house building project, let's say the team could use a predictive approach to plan and build the house, which is really common for house building. We'll plan it all out, work the plan, but use an iterative approach for a part of it, like the interior design part of the project. So they're going to have to work closely with the stakeholders to figure out the design. So we're going to use an adaptive approach for that part. Or the other way, like maybe we've decided to use an adaptive approach to develop a new product with, as part of it, a predictive approach for the marketing and sales aspects. So just based on the needs of your project, and you can fit them any way that makes sense. So we typically see development approach as a spectrum rather than three distinct approaches of, predictive, adaptive, and hybrid. So on one end of the spectrum, we've got our purely predictive planned out approach. On the other, we have adaptive, our change-driven approach. So as a project needs to be more iterative, more incremental, it may require a more hybrid approach. And this enables teams to progressively elaborate requirements and needs and release value to the customer before the end of the project. And we are expected to choose the best development approach for a project depending on the resources, timelines, stakeholders, industry, the project works, so many factors. Each project and situation requires an assessment of what method or way of working is going to best apply. So before we move on to the next slide, there's a quiz on the next slide. So if you've got this printed out, flip it over, put it to the side. I want you to take part in the quiz and challenge yourself, your understanding. It is a terminology quiz about development approach and life cycle. So I'm just going to give everybody here are the instructions for the activity we are about to perform that everybody is required to participate in. So I'm going to explain how this is going to happen, and then I'm going to give you 2 minutes to do it. So on the left-hand side, there are 4 terms. And I've I've given them letters, A, B, C, D. So I kind of updated the slide. You wouldn't see it on yours, to give you letters to work with to represent the terms. On the right-hand side are some statements with some blank spaces. So from top to bottom on the right-hand side, I would like you to determine which term fits in that blank space of the available terms on the left-hand side. So what I would like you to do within 2 minutes is, in the questions area, in one single post, I would like to see 5 letters to represent the terms that fit in the blank spaces, because there's 5 spaces, so you're going to be using one of the terms more than once. So from top to bottom on the right-hand side, 5 letters to represent what words go in those spaces. And just a heads up, some of the stuff can be intuitive based on the information they're giving you. I'm not showing it yet because I want people to hear the instructions before I put it in front, because some people just start up on it and then they don't do it right. So just want to make sure we're all in the same format. I do this with quizzes to get everybody oriented before I show it. So I'll show it to you in just a second, and then I'll start the timer for 2 minutes. So again, there's 5 spaces and 4 terms. You'll get 2 minutes, again, in a single post in the questions area, 5 letters to represent the words that fit in the 5 spaces, no punctuation, no spaces. So I can, and ideally in caps, because it's easier to tell letters in caps, because I want to look across what everybody answered so I can see if there's any trends that I need to address to call out. But with that said, those are all of your instructions. You got your 4 terms on the left-hand side. You've got your 5 statement, or you've got your statements on the right-hand side with 5 spaces. So you need to determine by using a letter of the term that fits in that space. So within 2 minutes, I'll start my timer in a second. 5 letters to represent the words from top to bottom on the right-hand side. No punctuation, no spaces. And go. So you got about 30 seconds left. Two minutes are up. Okay. Okay, so we're going to start at the top. On the right-hand side. So project professionals use a development approach or method, which can be predictive, iterative, incremental, adaptive, or hybrid, which are development approaches that we've been talking about. So one of the notes that I saw when they updated the materials last week is they seem to be moving away from incremental as a development approach. I mean, it is a way to deliver things, but it's not really about doing work. So they don't really, they're really just focusing on predictive, adaptive, and hybrid when they talk about development approaches. But they gave you the answer there. Those are development approaches. To create and evolve a deliverable, which is a unique and verifiable product, result, or capability to perform a service, also known as product, service, or result, which is how we've traditionally seen it. But there are any way, there's any number of ways that we can say a thing. So you need to be, I don't want to say, I keep thinking adaptable, but it's not really it. You need to recognize where they're saying something that they may just reordered it. And so a product, service, or result collectively is referred to as a deliverable. A project passes through a series of logically related activities called phases from its start to its completion. And that's kind of its definition. I don't know if we saw it yet or not, but phases of a project. But we break up the entire project lifecycle into phases to structure it. So the intended life of the project broken up into phases from its start to its completion. This entire process is called a life cycle. The entire project life cycle. Now, the last one we haven't talked about. I do want to do a little bit of confirmation to make sure that we do eventually talk about it. So this one's kind of like extra credit. If you were getting any credit at all, which you are not for this activity, but acceptance of a deliverable is required to complete a process, phase, or project. And something to note, the final state of every deliverable is an accepted deliverable, which means our customers are saying, yes, it's acceptable. We can use it. It's something we can use. So the correct series of letters is BACTA, as I like to call it. Oh, I didn't mean to do that. I'm getting a new mouse. This one's driving me crazy. I'm looking to see. There's a bunch of BACTAs, which is always good to see. A BACTA with a B at the end. I've seen that before too. But I'm seeing a lot of BDCs. Am I in fact seeing a lot of BDCs? I'm seeing a number of BDCs. So this would be life cycle instead of deliverable. So I could almost see where life cycle would come in if we didn't have the rest of it, even though deliverable is the correct answer. Any way you slice this, deliverable is the right answer. But if you kind of think, if you don't read the rest of it, create and evolve a life cycle, the development approach. But really, we use a development approach to build something, to do the work. I was just trying to think, what is the thought process that may have driven us to this, so I can correct the thought process so you kind of start seeing them a little bit more clearly. I know I did kind of step through it. Does anybody have any questions about any of these while I go through and delete all the answers? So I can open this up if you have questions to type. So just raise your hand if you do, in fact, have a question for me now about this. I think just reviewing it tends to answer questions about it. Okay. So it's true that our organizational governance and our enterprise environmental factors are going to be a major determining factor in the life cycle your project follows. We still should always understand what else might be possible. Because remember, your role is to ensure successful project outcomes. So during formation of your team, discuss the pros and cons of the different development approaches. And there are types of questions here that can help your team focus its thinking about whether a single delivery or a phased one might be better. And if phased, if time boxing is going to work or if using a continuous flow is going to be better for the project. And keep in mind, you have the ability to switch between them as needed. So we're going to do just an short introductory dive into project governance. We do see it more later in the course, but we're going to introduce you to some concepts up here. We did briefly mention governance in our review. The PMBOK governance establishes the structures for oversight. That's through policies, practices, and rules for authority. At the organizational level, governance is focused on achieving strategic and operational goals. For a project, governance provides guidance and control for project management activities to ensure your project does deliver the intended product, service, or result, and it always remains aligned with your organization's strategy. So this is the first time we're seeing this, but this shows how this particular topic aligns to the test by noting how it aligns to the exam content outline, or ECO, that we introduced in our orientation. So this particular topic comes from the ECO, and if you remember, the ECO is hierarchically structured, so we can find these topics in. It's not really a topic, though. I struggle with the right word here, but we can find this. Ultimately it's an enabler. But we could find this in the third domain. There are 3 domains: people, process, and business environment, in that order. So number 3 is business environment. The next number is task. So it's the first task in the business environment domain, and this particular thing would be the first enabler in that task. So you can trace this right back to what you need to know for the test. And so we're going to see this going forward, how what we're talking about actually relates to what you need to know for the test. So in this particular part, we're going to be discussing really the first part of defining and establishing governance. And in most cases, this is going to be an established part of the organization as part of your organizational process assets, or your OPAs. Talk more about those too. So Project Management Office, or PMO. If you're not familiar, it's essentially the project management department in an organization. Their main job is to bring together and coordinate activities related to managing portfolios, programs, and projects, and exactly what they do can differ depending on the specific needs of the organization. PMOs can potentially help an organization better utilize shared resources. They'll provide good practices for project management. They'll develop policies and share documentation and improve communication and information sharing across the initiatives in the organization. And if you're not familiar, like, not all organizations have a PMO, but for the ones that do, they typically take on one of 3 types of roles. So you could have a supportive PMO, which creates the methodology for project management for the organization, like all of the step-by-step, this is how project management's done in the organization. They'll provide guidance in project management, if you need that, and they'll make all this information publicly available, and people can use it if they want to, but they don't have to. Or your PMO can take on a controlling role, which does all of those things with the methodology and the guidance, also makes it all publicly available, and has some authority to make sure people are using it and using it correctly. Or a PMO can take on a directive role, and this is probably least common, which does all of those things, creates the methodology, provides guidance, makes it publicly available, makes sure people are using it right, but also has ultimate accountability for projects and project management in the organization. So they may help select projects. They will assign out project managers for projects. They will create metrics to articulate project success in the organization. They will receive reports and share with senior leadership. Again, ultimately accountable for the success of projects and project management in the organization. Now, regardless of the type of role your PMO takes on, in the very least, what they all do is provide methodology in project management for the organization and guidance in project management. So if there's a question on the test that leads you to, you don't know what to do next in project management, the correct answer is go to the PMO, because that is always their responsibility. And for the test, unless they say something different in the question, we assume we work in an organization with a PMO. Agile centers of excellence or value delivery offices are emerging within organizations adopting more decentralized structures where teams need to respond quickly to changing customer needs. And their role is going to be different, taking on more coaching and mentoring efforts rather than like managerial. We did briefly introduce these organizational influences early on in the PMBOK. These are things that you need to consider at the start of every project because they're going to impact how projects are performed in the organization. And we did define them, but I'm going to give you some more examples now. So they include our enterprise environmental factors, which I like to refer to as EAFs, and our organizational process assets that I like to refer to as OPAs. So EAFs are essentially factors of the world we live in because we work within the environment of the enterprise. So we have no control over these things. It's just, it's a situation you're in. You got to understand it so you can work in that system. Now, EAFs can be either external or internal to the organization. So all external environmental factors are EAFs, like the kind of industry we're in, like the difference between regulated and non-regulated absolutely impact what we do. Could also be shifts in social norms, maybe economic factors like inflation or currency exchange rates, maybe the cost and availability of raw materials, environmental aspects like severe weather, natural disasters. Again, they're a factor of the world you're in, and they can impact what you're doing, so you need to be aware of them. Internal EAFs are things like the organizational structure, the organizational culture, the organizational communication style and communication technology they use, the available resources and skill sets, even the types of technology they've decided to use. Factors of the world you live in because you're in that environment. Like when I started a place, I want to know what software am I using to create the project schedule? And then they're going to tell me the software they use. And then I got to get good at that because it's part of the environment. I don't get an option. If everybody's using MS Project, I'm using MS Project. OPAs are inherently internal. So organizational process assets, kind of assets in the organization or processes that are assets in the, anyway, I can't back into it. But to describe them, OPAs include how the organization wants us to do things. Remember, PMBOK's a reference guide. It's not going to tell you how to do it because your organization needs to make those decisions. So it would include like the policies, standards, procedures, templates, guidelines in the organization. Because you need to understand the procedures that everybody's using to be able to perform projects efficiently in that system. OPAs also include the collection of knowledge we create by doing things in the organization, which can be referred to as a corporate or organizational knowledge base. I prefer organizational knowledge base. That comes up quite a bit more often. And this is going to include our plans, our results, our lessons learned from really all the initiatives performed in the organization. They provide historical information that is an asset for every aspect of the organization, certainly projects. So a question that I used to get a lot, so I'm just going to proactively answer it. People would ask me about this corporate or organizational knowledge base. Is this thing a database? And the answer to that question is my answer to every question. It depends. Because it really depends on, in that moment, how you in your head are defining what you mean by database. So when you're asking, is it a database? And in your head, you're thinking about the technology. Like in our organization, we use Access databases. If that's what you're thinking, then no, that is not the organizational knowledge base. That's actually an internal EAF because it's the software they decided we're going to use. We're going to use Access databases, factor of the world you live in. If, however, when you're asking if it's a database, you're really thinking about the data that's contained in that database. Like when I say I need to run a report from the database, I'm not saying I need to run a report from Access. I'm saying I need to run a report from the data contained in Access so I can pull out of it anything relevant to my query that I can analyze. That's the long-winded version of that. So if that's what you're talking about, then yes, that is the organizational knowledge base. So there are multiple parts of our system for value delivery that work together to focus on achieving strategic goals and creating value for the organization. At the top, we have portfolio management. And portfolios are collections of programs, projects, and operations that all align to an organizational strategic goal. So portfolios always have direct strategic alignment in the organization. In my experience, it's typically the bucket of money that gets set aside to pay for things to satisfy that objective. So they're going to then in the portfolio make decisions about what initiatives they're going to perform to satisfy that strategic goal using that bucket of money. So they decide what they're going to spend it on. Programs are groups of similar projects that all align to a program objective. They're managed that way for ease of management. It also allows them to take advantage of economies of scale, like bulk purchasing materials at a discount to get a bigger profit, and sharing resources across similar projects that all need the same materials and resources. Project management is how we apply the knowledge, skills, tools, and techniques to perform a project. And projects may or may not be a part of a program, but will typically, but not always, align to a portfolio. So those things create our system for value delivery. So to give you an example, let's go back to the construction company. So in the construction company, we did some strategic planning, and we've decided that in our annual goals, we now have a goal to get into the subdivision space of real estate. And if you're not familiar, because maybe it's a regional term, and I am the only one that knows what I'm talking about, a subdivision is where a company buys a huge plot of land, they subdivide it into individual plots around an infrastructure of roads and utilities, and then they'll sell a plot and the house they're going to build on that individual plot, basically creating a neighborhood, in our case, of the exact same house over and over and over again. And if you're from Chicago, that's not surprising. We have entire neighborhoods like that. So we want to do this. It's going to be good. It's going to create value for the organization. We're still going to be doing those one-off houses that we've always done. That's kind of the bread and butter, but we're going to do this too. So in support of that, the organization has set aside a bucket of money that they're now referring to as the subdivision portfolio. And the subdivision portfolio has made a decision that we're actually going to start with two subdivisions. So we're going to have subdivision A on one side of town. We're going to have subdivision B on the other side of town. And within each subdivision are the houses we're going to build in that subdivision. And as we've already agreed, a house is a project. And since the houses in subdivision A are all going to be in subdivision A is actually a program. Subdivision B is actually a program because it's going to contain It's going to contain the houses, the projects that we're going to be building in that subdivision that can, like, again, share resources. It's just going to make it easier to manage them together. So that's how the parts fit together. Any questions before I move on? So it's important to predetermine what success means for an organization and a project. Project success can be determined by a consensus among our stakeholders that it delivered greater value than the cost, time, and effort it took to do it, meaning it was worth the investment. But there are a couple of dimensions that we're going to consider to measure project success. One of them is how well it achieves the value expected from the project. So success can be focused on meeting strategic goals, like increased market share or meeting customer, compliance needs. So was the outcome successful? That's one consideration. So these are going to include things like financial gains, like return on investment or even increased revenue. They also include non-financial gains, like gaining market advantage, attracting new customers, maybe meeting sustainability targets. And then these metrics, they're going to help us to understand the broader impact of the project. And the other dimension looks at success based on how well the management of the project met its goals, as well as how effectively the execution of the project used resources, and of course, the satisfaction of our stakeholders, a key project success measure. So was the output, did the output create value? Did how we manage it, did our goals get met? So we want to consider both when we talk about, whether or not we're delivering value and, was it successful? So a couple of real world examples. Got the Sydney Opera House, which was originally budgeted, cost $7 million and take 4 years. That was the plan. But it ended up costing over $100 million and it took 14 years. So from a management perspective, it failed. But today, the result is a global icon that brings lasting cultural and economic value, making the outcome a clear success. Project management, not so much. Then they bring up the Montreal overpass, which had to be demolished a year after it was completed due to design flaws. So clearly the project management process failed. This was bad design, but so did the outcome. And it wasted nearly $11 million. Failed on both sides. So you also need to define governance escalation paths and thresholds. So that is, you need to establish clear procedures and criteria for escalating issues or risks or even decisions within your project's governance framework. Project governance is an oversight function. It has the key benefits of getting us a clear path of accountability. It'll support issue management and resolution and provide information distribution and clear communication. It'll outline roles, relationships, and responsibilities among our project stakeholders. Now, project governance, it's usually already in place before the project starts. And it's either determined by the project management office or based on how it works in the organization. So based on organizational governance, it'll be responsible for reviews of project aspects like the spending on the project, and it may require tailoring based on the unique attributes of the project. It provides support for projects in the form of reliable processes to follow and structures or frameworks. This is a list of the processes typically governed by a PMO. Now, with adaptive projects, we see the team and stakeholders working together and getting updates regularly. This gives them the opportunity to offer insight, oversight, and near real-time monitoring of the work that's being delivered throughout the project. An iterative approach can deliver value-based outputs more quickly and with a lesser long-term resource commitment than a predictive approach. Now, within an organization, there may be separate or combined committees to provide support to the project manager. The governance board often provides oversight to project objectives, performance, and ensuring adherence to project policies and procedures, while the steering committee often provides input for key decisions that have been escalated to the board. Some Agile projects have a board that works between project and organizational governance, really more common for Scrum and SAFe frameworks. Project teams and project managers do have some authority to act on change and issues. The scope of this authority is determined by the organization through the project management office, or alternatively, the authority that manages programs or portfolios. Now, we can articulate the scope of authority through the use of thresholds and tolerances. So a threshold is an actual point beyond which an escalation needs to happen to wherever our predetermined oversight points are for escalation. A tolerance is an area of variance to any aspect of the project where it's within the purview of the team to address a variance. So threshold, a degree of variance beyond which we need to escalate. Tolerances, we go from 0 variation up to the threshold, and the team would address that. And that way we don't need to get management involved in everything, every variance. There should be a degree that we can address. Your governance system works with your value delivery system to keep the project moving efficiently. This is important because it shows the potential relationship between value delivery and the life cycle or methods used. In predictive approaches, value is delivered as a product of the life cycle because the deliverable or result is given to the customer at the end, and the benefit can be realized immediately in the short and or long term, or take a long time after to be realized. Now, in adaptive approaches, value delivery is embedded in the life cycle. So the customer participates in the creation of value, and they're going to receive the benefit of the project incrementally at the end of iterations. So a big difference between development approaches is what happens at the end of each phase or iteration. It's similar but different. Like in predictive projects, the project work typically gets divided into phases. And then at the end of each phase, we have what's referred to as a phase gate. It's a review at the end of each phase. During the review, leaders decide whether to move forward to the next phase or make some changes and then move on to the next phase, or just stop the project altogether. Now, phase gate is the proper term, but you can definitely see it referred to as stage gate, governance gate, or kill point, because this is often where the decision is made, like the go, no go decision for the next phase. Now, by having phase gates, it gives the organization the opportunity at regular points through the project to just kind of take a pause, evaluate progress, and decide if moving forward still makes sense. Adaptive projects split the work into iterations, and at the end of each iteration, the team reviews its results, gathers feedback, it takes action to improve value in the next iteration. And the process continues, guided by the customer's acceptance criteria or some statement of expectation of an iteration until a unit of value can be delivered. The development approach we're using really depends on the organization's governance policies and tolerances for risk, change, and other factors, as well as the importance given to the stakeholder or customer inputs through the project and the type of work we're doing. So project phases are collections of logically related activities with delivery of an output, outcome, or deliverable, followed by a phase gate. Phases can be set up to run sequentially one after another, the phase gate between them, or overlapping the phase gate, the end. And that's going to depend on things like the type of work we're doing or the number of teams we've got working at once. And again, phase gate at the end. Now, good governance helps project managers and teams make clear decisions about whether a project should continue or maybe we should stop it. We don't want to get to the end and be like, oh, somewhere before this, we probably should have stopped. So in this example, the project manager plans for the project to move through these 3 phases. And at the start of each phase, the project manager makes sure that earlier assumptions are still valid, will consider any possible risks, and explain the deliverables in detail. After the main deliverables for the phase are completed, a review is held to make sure that the work is complete and accepted during a phase gate. And at that point, a phase may be officially closed or the entire project may be ended. And that's usually if major risks are identified or if the project objectives are no longer going to create value for the organization because, perception of value can change over time. We are going to skip the rest of these because they show up in lesson 5 and they make more sense there, in my opinion. So we're just going to leave that there. Now, I'm going to bring up lesson 3. So any questions while I'm bringing up lesson 3? Let me just get this step done. Oh, I can just double click it. That's super easy. I didn't even know. Question posted, what happens when stakeholder governance, for example, the client and the consultant, contradict or go against each other? Which one takes preference? It depends. And that's where having a predetermined communicated governance structure makes the most sense. Because you have to make decisions up front about who's going to make decisions. You know, which role has the authority to make that decision. And maybe there's got to be a final decision maker. So you don't kind of walk into it not knowing what would happen if they don't agree. You need to figure that out in advance. So really clearly stated roles and responsibilities, especially when it pertains to governance roles, makes all of that so much easier. I just remember I had a project and we kept meeting and nothing was moving forward. And it's just like every time we meet, like, why aren't things moving? And it's because we were coming together and we had all these great ideas. We just hadn't figured out who was going to decide which one we would actually do. So we had to take a pause and find a decider. Had we known that up front, it would have gone so much easier. So we make decisions about that in advance. I used to get a lot of questions. It's funny because it just occurred to me. I used to get a lot of questions from people that were having conflict issues on their projects. And I don't see that a lot anymore. And I think it's just simply because we have like way too much to go through. But we will talk about conflict management. It is one of the key things that we do on projects. And every situation is different, you know, because your organization is different, your stakeholders are different, but there are always ways to focus the right ways for conflict. It's just weird. I just remember answering these questions like 10 years ago. It was like the big thing. Okay, so on to lesson 3. So now we're kind of looking at not deep into a project yet, but some of the things we need to consider for projects. So we're kind of past the fundamentals here. So these are the things that we would need to know early in a project before you can meaningfully plan, negotiate, or manage expectations. Specifically in this lesson, we're going to explore 4 main tasks from the exam content outline. These are all from the people domain because they all relate to people, you know, stakeholders and communication and sharing the proper vision about the project. They all relate to people and understanding and working with others. And then there are the various tasks. And then within each task, start with the first one. We're going to see in sections going from here, like the different enablers, the things that you like work you're going to do, things you need to understand to be able to support that task. So really, before we can do anything with stakeholders, you need to make sure you're creating the most effective plans by understanding like who they are and maybe what their motivations are. We can't really do anything on a project if we don't have stakeholders involved. So we need to understand that at the start of the project. So that's one of the first things we talk about. You want to establish effective relationships and communication with them throughout the project and maintain a focus on what the project means for them, either individually or as a group. And you are going to spend a lot of time communicating with stakeholders. So good relationships are essential. And we will be talking about all those things over the next couple of sessions. But first, you need to identify your stakeholders. So it's important to start thinking broadly about stakeholders. And here's how I learned the definition of a stakeholder. A stakeholder is anyone that can be impacted by the output or the performance of a project, or can impact it in some way, or even just thinks they can be impacted. That's how I learned it. So you got to be thinking, broadly of who they are, so you can effectively prepare for their successful engagement on the project. You want to maximize stakeholder satisfaction. As I keep saying over and over again, it gets lost, but it is one of the key project success criteria, stakeholder satisfaction. Now, back in the day, not all the way back in the day, but back in the day, just before I studied for the test. Just give me like 20 years ago. Back in the day before I studied, if somebody would have asked me, okay, who are your stakeholders on the project? I would have probably thought for like a second and said, well, my customers, my end users, they're my stakeholders. And then I would have stopped and I would have been perfectly fine with that answer. And I'm not wrong. End users and customers are going to be impacted by the output. They're definitely stakeholders. Just a quick show of hands. Raise your hand if my audio has been strong for you. It's been good. It's not been wonky. Yeah, I think I agree. I think it was probably just on your end. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and put the hands down, assuming everybody was fine except for that one person. Okay, all the hands are down now. Okay, so again, you got to think more broadly than that. Like, what about the project team? They're probably not going to use the output of the project, but absolutely are impacted by the performance of the project because they got to perform it. And they've got needs. I need to understand. So definitely stakeholders. But what about the project sponsor? Probably not going to use the end result of the project, probably not going to do any of the work on the project, but clearly your project sponsor has needs you've got to satisfy. So that really means there's a very wide variety of roles and people that can be project stakeholders, even the ones that aren't directly related to the project, whose decisions can impact your project, like your functional and resource managers in your organization that have authority to prioritize the use of their resources. It's like if you ever had a situation where somebody, a function gave you somebody, assigned somebody to your project, and that person's supposed to do something today, but they're no longer available because there was something more important for the function. You're just left high and dry. What do? You escalate. Go to your project sponsor. Get somebody else. So we do have to account for their needs as well. You'll want to start with the initial project documents, like the project charter or any other initial agreements about the project to identify stakeholders. We're going to be considering internal and external stakeholders. We actually do the biggest bulk of identifying stakeholders right at the start of the project, but it can continue throughout the project. Like whenever there's a change to the project or an issue on a project, or even the decisions we make about the project. Like maybe we decided to procure something, so now there's a whole group of procurement stakeholders we got to plan for. So it's going to be important to identify all of your stakeholders as early as possible, and that way we'll be able to make effective plans to satisfy them and avoid potentially costly changes later due to missed requirements from the stakeholders we missed up front. So there are a series of artifacts that are going to help you as you identify, analyze, and then later engage your stakeholders. You'll develop and update these set of project artifacts collectively and then tailor them to your project. Some of these are used to analyze and classify our stakeholders. There are also some plans that we can create with a focus on successful stakeholder engagement, like the stakeholder engagement plan and the communications management plan that work together. We can use a stakeholder engagement assessment matrix to plan and then manage stakeholder engagement as the project progresses. And we're going to be touching on all these things as we go through this lesson. For smaller projects, it's going to be easier to be more thorough in your identification and assessment of stakeholders, and then in developing an effective communication strategy with your stakeholders. However, for larger projects or those with a challenging stakeholder environment, it's also important to be thorough and use many of these artifacts like our classification tools, and they can be helpful. Of course, you know who they are, then you got to analyze them. Stakeholder analysis helps us to plan for effective engagement. We start with our list of identified stakeholders, then we'll use some tools and techniques to better understand them. This analysis is going to help us to understand where stakeholders should be involved in the project, like my most important thing, who's going to be responsible for, whose requirements do I need to gather? It's also going to help us to plan how we should communicate and engage with each stakeholder. Now, we start by data gathering. maybe reaching out to others to understand what they know about our stakeholders, potentially through the use of questionnaires and surveys, or just doing some brainstorming, bring people together to brainstorm. And I just feel like I need to point this out. Brainstorming is only ever an ideation technique for data gathering. We don't use it to analyze data, we use it to gather data. And I don't know why there's sometimes some blur there. And then data analysis is about taking that data and using it to make decisions. And it's an analysis that can be both quantitative and qualitative, so both objective and subjective. So we do perform a stakeholder analysis to understand what each stakeholder needs and wants from the project and how they perceive the project. You need to understand their interests in the project, like their rights and ownership of the project, their knowledge and contribution to the project. Reviewing any initial documents, some document analysis can also be used to assess our stakeholders. Then with our analysis, we can use some data representation, which are visual ways to share information. So we can classify our stakeholders that we can use for planning other areas of stakeholder engagement, like communications, which is primarily where we will see that, which is toward the end of this lesson. So as we're gathering data about stakeholders, the artifact we will create is the stakeholder register. So I just want to make sort of a blanket statement about everything when we're doing projects, and that is you will start by looking for the standard in your organization. So if you're looking for a stakeholder register, look to see if they provide one, because that's the one everybody's going to be familiar with, and it's just going to be so much easier to use. They already know how to use it. Now, if they don't provide you a standard, if it's something you can do the same way on projects, you can just create your own standard and utilize that on all of your projects. You'll have to coach your team on using it. And it's not as efficient, but it will get the job done. So in terms of a stakeholder register, it really is one of the a few different types of registers that are useful for projects of all kinds. We haven't even talked development approach yet for this project. Basically, a register is a project document that records the evolving state of a project aspect, and in this case, it's going to be stakeholders. So you want to keep in mind any of the resources already a part of your organizational process assets, like the stakeholder register template and instructions we use, stakeholder registers from previous projects that are similar, like who was involved in previous projects, and then our lessons learned repository, which should have information from past projects about the preferences, the actions, the involvement of stakeholders, kind of what we've learned about them. So you will use, of course, the template for the stakeholder register that's available in your organization. Otherwise, you can find one. I think works best in the context of your organization and your project. Now, this example just shows some of the key information you would want in a stakeholder register. You do not need to use this format. PMI does not dictate the formats you use, especially if your organization already has a template, or if there's other information for your project that you would want in addition to any of the information in this example. Now, if you want to find more templates, because we are going to be talking about some good practice processes and some documents that go along with it. So if you want to start using one and your organization doesn't have a template for it, some places to look. You can check out PM training. So in the instructor class materials, when you get into your course in the during class tab, in the SOC drawer, the additional materials folder, there is a folder that has the word templates in it. So we put some templates out there that you can consider and certainly tailor them however you need to. Or you can go to the source, pmi.org. Again, lots of stuff going on out there at pmi.org. Not everything requires that you be a member to access it. So go ahead and check that out. They have PMI Standards Plus, which offers, they say bundles of templates, but it also records it digitally follows the kind of evolution of project management over time. So it kind of gives us a digital platform to do that between PMBOK, basically. You do need to be a PMI member to access it, or you can pay to access PMI Standards Plus. So if you're test driving PMI membership, go check it out. It's at pmi.org. You can find it there. Or you can go to projectmanagement.com. Spelled in the traditional way, no spaces. It is a PMI site. You'll see their logo all over it. I think projectmanagement.com tends to be more like community sourced, where PMI.org tends to be more member sourced. There's tons of stuff at projectmanagement.com, like templates for tons of things. They've got webinars and stuff. I encourage you to go check it out. As a PMI member, you get access to all of the things there. But if you're not a PMI member, because you don't have to be, you'll still get access to a bunch of stuff. And this is really honestly the reason why I keep my PMI membership on auto renew, because I love having access to everything at projectmanagement.com. I need a template. I know where I'm going because it's been reviewed by PMI. So, it's got to be like decent, right? PMI. Charles, you had a question? Your hand is up.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to comment or maybe ask you. I don't know that I've ever formally used a register. We've always and I've done a ton of projects, but right. So we know who our stakeholders are. We know what their concerns are and what their need for information is, and so on and so forth. But we don't formally use this kind of a form. Do you want to comment on that? I mean, is that necessary for success? Is it okay? Is there adaptability on all this stuff we're going to learn, et cetera? Thank you.
All of this stuff is adaptable. Like project management is a practice. It is fluid. We're applying different things. Organizations have different needs for things. So if you've got a different type of document for that, my inner PMP kind of cringes when you say, well, we all know what they need. It's like, yeah, we all don't, because I don't. How would I find that out? So you need to at least have some documentation. And I think you're saying you do, you just don't use this format. And that's totally fine. This is just an example of an organized, like matrices tend to be organized formats. But you don't have to use this. There's no requirement. You have to use what everybody expects or what everybody is willing to use, what makes the most sense, based on your organizational culture, the industry you're in, whatever information you think is necessary. There is no one way to do things. And we always defer to our organizational process assets, and in some ways our EIFs as well, right? So it's based on the organization. So you don't have to. I know you opened your line. Did you have another comment or anything?
No, not really. I just wanted to say, yeah, thanks. I get I don't know that I've ever formally listed them. However, I refer to them. Like I'm project manager, and in our meetings, I emphasize how important it is to give information in one direction of a certain type and in another of another type, and so on, and communicating with my team all the time, and so on and so forth. But yeah, I hear you. You kind of cringe that I don't document it formally. I guess
No,
I should.
That's my inner PMP, because because I have to get people like accustomed to PMI land, so I get a little bit more picky. But really, anybody could need the information. So you have to create information that everybody can get a hold of. And if you're not and so my point is, like, if you're not documenting it, how does somebody coming in from another organization even know that? They weren't at all the meetings. They don't know who the stakeholders are. Like, especially consultants, we rely on good documentation to understand how things have been happening so we can kind of fit into that. So I think, the extra effort to document things is, I don't think anybody's going to hate it. Nobody's going to be like, why are you documenting stuff, right? And I think it's just a good practice so we can share with everybody. But in PMI land, we have to share with everybody. We have to be prepared for anybody on the planet to need to know that piece of information. So it needs to be available. But if that's how your organization does it and everybody's cool with it and things work great, that's totally fine. No problem.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to take too much time, but I do want to comment. Yeah, there's a ton of documentation that's available to everybody. Everybody should know where it is. But the explicit document of stakeholders and who they are and what the role is, I'm not. I don't formally. I don't have a document often that says, yeah, these are the upper level managers that have to be given this information. But we just do it. We give them all the information, and
Sure.
people know who they are, and we communicate that to our team, and so on.
Totally get your point. I'm sorry,
Yeah.
we are kind of behind schedule,
Yeah,
but
yeah, sorry.
I don't mean to cut you off, but we do need to move forward. Again, we have to get back to what it's like in PMI land. So again, if that's working in your organization, that's great. Nobody's going to tell you you're doing anything wrong. In PMI land, it's wrong. And in good practice, I think it's also helpful to do a lot of these things. Some of them feel like way too much, but a lot of things just seem like, yeah, maybe we should document it so anybody else would know. But again, however your organization does it is the right way to do things. So in PMI land, these are the right ways to do things. And you just got to kind of be in that land for the test. So often we know people in the organization or the people on the project just by their job title or their function, but we are going to need to go beyond that to better understand their relationship to the project because it may be different. So you need to have a sense of a stakeholders association to the project. So we are going to be considering or assessing things like their level of power or authority on the project, their interest in the success of the project, their ability to influence aspects of the project, like their possible positive or negative impacts to the project. How people perceive the project can impact your project. People that are resistant to your project, your detractors can wreak havoc on your project if their impact isn't monitored and neutralized. But even your supporters can negatively impact your project. Like if they're out in the world perpetuating overly positive information about the project, that is not correct. Like maybe they're out there promising everyone that, sure, the project's going to end on time when you're reporting it won't, because it won't. And that just sows miscommunication and confusion. So we want to use strong people skills in all project communications. And this includes things like emotional intelligence, our ability to recognize and understand and manage our own emotions and the emotions of others or groups. We also need to use their judgment, their expert judgment, and active listening to communicate effectively. Now, stakeholder feedback and perceptions are especially important in customer-focused environments. So help your team understand how different stakeholders view the project and what matters to them. So build strong relationships between the stakeholders and the project team. And which is not to say the project team aren't stakeholders, they are, but other stakeholders and the project team. You want to encourage open communication. You want to keep your stakeholders informed throughout the project. So clear and consistent communication helps build trust, improve collaboration, and increase the chances of project success. So some guidelines for communicating: you want to meet face-to-face as often as possible. It's even one of our agile principles. Face-to-face conversations are always the best. We also want to make sure that everyone's getting the right information at the right time. I have a little personal motto for myself when I'm managing projects. My goal, and you're going to see it's a completely stretch goal, is that everybody knows everything at the exact same time. And I know it's not realistic, but if it could happen, like we don't get any control over when people consume the information we send them. Like I can text the kids, but they're not going to read it right away. They'll get to it eventually. So I have no control over when people consume the information. So I can't make sure everybody knows everything at the exact same time. But if you could do that, like in a moment, every person on the project knows that exact same piece of information. Nobody's going to be confused. Everything's going to work in lockstep. It's going to be seamless. That would be great. So I just try to create an environment as close to that as I can physically, humanly get. So making sure that I've got systems in place where I can get the information to people so nobody's blindsided, everybody's on the same path, everybody agrees and understands and they're moving forward. So clear communications in a singular way are so important. So when you've identified and analyzed stakeholders, then you need to tailor your communication to meet their needs. And this can help to ensure that information about your project is delivered effectively. And that's going to lead to better engagement, collaboration, and project outcomes. Ultimately, there are different options you can choose to share communications or to share information, excuse me. We do them in communication. So you need to choose the correct methods to share different types of information or for specific situations or even specific stakeholders. So prior to choosing a communication method or technology, You should consider the preferences and communication skills of each communication group and tailor to their needs and abilities. Now, it should all kind of eventually come down to your organization's communication style to determine how communications are going to be performed on your project. And the organizational communication style is how, as an organization, we are just accustomed to getting our communications. Of course, we should always still be considering more effective ways to improve communication as we're planning communications and then regularly through the project, always looking to improve, considering alternatives. So we're going to use the stakeholder register, which contains our analysis about our stakeholders to perform a communications requirements analysis. So we can plan communications. Of course, we'll talk to them directly to understand their needs as well. So we're going to consider the necessary content of the communication, what information they're going to need, when they're going to need it, and how they want to receive it. And all those details are going to help us to create an effective communications management plan, which is kind of the goal. So aligned with our communication requirements analysis, there is a spotlight video. Under spotlight videos in your PMI course, the one you just accessed, for communication channels, that I encourage you to go check out. And just talks about the impact of bringing together groups for communications and things you want to consider. You can keep better control. So ultimately, there are two broad communication approaches. We have interactive and one-way. Now, interactive communication happens when both the sender and receiver can interact in a synchronous way. And this is useful in situations when you need to both share and receive information. It isn't something you can really do with a large group of people. You're just going to let that settle in for a moment. So hard to interact with a large group. So when I think of a common interactive communication I have, I kind of think of when I bring my team together to talk about status of the project. It's a small group. I mean, it's just my team, and they need to share information with me. I need to share with them. It needs to be interactive. So, face-to-face meeting or conference call or video conference, whatever that is. Or they have one way, which is two methods, push and pull communications. So we use one-way communication. Well, how it works is it happens in an asynchronous way, just in one direction. It's useful when you don't need an immediate interactive response to what you're sharing. It is something you can definitely use with a larger group that maybe wouldn't be as easy to manage interactively. So among our methods, we have a push communication, and this is where we take the communication and we push it to recipients. So this is something you could do with a larger group than you might be able to do interactively, but it still can't be an enormous group because you need to know who needs it so you can push it to them. So kind of another example, like an immediate example of this in my mind is taking that status report I just created with the team. Actually, we're not going to ... it. We're going to attach it to an email, and then we will ... send it to some key stakeholders. And it's going to go to that group distribution list, my list of key stakeholders that I have to maintain. So that's why it can't be an enormous group, because I need to be able to maintain it. Or we could use a pull communication. And this is where we place the communication somewhere and people can pull it when they want to. If they want to, they just go to that public place and they grab it. This is useful if you're dealing with an enormous group of people where it's going to be really challenging to maintain a solid group distribution list. It can also be used in situations where you need to share large volumes of information that otherwise would be really cumbersome to send to everybody. We'll just put it someplace publicly and they can grab it. I kind of look at this as when I take that status report that I created and I put it in a folder on my project SharePoint page. And if this is something that is expected for all projects, like they all have to have a SharePoint page and they all have to have a folder for status, then everybody knows where to go to get the status. So I don't have to send it to anybody. I can put it there. People can pull it when they want to, if they want to. I don't even need to know who they are. So I can put it out there for the people we cannot anticipate that might want it. I think another great example of a full communication is a blog. People write an article, they put it out on the internet, not even knowing if anybody wants to read it. Blog. There are different aspects you need to consider when you plan communications. You need to choose communications that are going to be most effective for the type of information that you're sending. Like confidential or regulated information may require encrypting, so I have to plan for an encryption program. The urgency of the information, like is this something that needs to go out multiple times a day or maybe just once a month? You also need to consider the availability of the technology to support the type of communication you've decided you want to perform. Like maybe you think it'd be great if we could tweet out status all day long. Fine, but what if your organization doesn't allow you access to Twitter? Because a lot of organizations don't. And of course, overarching all of this, we need to consider the organizational communication style. Or again, how as an organization we expect our communications. Which doesn't mean you can't try new things, but you need to keep that in mind. So let's say, for example, in our organization, we expect to get project status via email, but they just gave us access to Twitter. So I'm tweeting out status all day long. But it's also important to remember that when people get really busy during the day, and I think that happens to everyone all the time, people will fall back on what they're accustomed to. So they're not going to think to look at Twitter. So until Twitter becomes part of the organizational communication style, until it gets embraced in the culture, you probably want to summarize all of your tweets in an email and send that out at the end of the day so everybody gets the information. You don't want people to miss some information just simply because you're trying something new to communicate, which eventually may be amazing, may work out great. Now, there is a core sender-receiver model that we've needed to know forever. And PMI is layering in some other stuff in this particular communication model, but the core basic sender-receiver model has a sender and a receiver. The sender will encode a message that the sender will transmit over a chosen medium, which could be email, text message, snail mail, carrier pigeon, whatever. They will transmit that message over a chosen medium, proactively accounting for what we refer to as noise. And noise is anything that could bar you from communicating clearly, which could be legitimate background noise. Like maybe you're calling somebody who's driving their car, or maybe you're calling somebody that works in a manufacturing plant. Well, that's a background noise. It could also be someone's current emotional state. Like maybe they think it's bad news, so they don't even want to get through your message. So as a sender, you need to account for that in how you encode the message so they can get through it, so they will get through all of it. So the receiver will decode the message. They will send an acknowledgement like an I got it over, they'll transmit it over a chosen medium, proactively accounting for noise. The receiver will encode a feedback or a response that they will also transmit over a chosen medium, proactively accounting for noise that the sender will decode. And that concludes our sender-receiver model. In this particular model, PMI is also layering in aspects of culture, things like nationality, gender, generation, and professional discipline. And on that note, I just want to take a moment. When you perform communications, when you create and share communications, you need to do it without using any professional jargon. Because even though you may be sending this email to another PMP who should totally understand what you mean when you say ITTO. First time somebody said that out in the wild, I was like, what? It's weird. Just showing off their brand new shiny PMP. I was like, what? Anyway, so even though that person may, you would be able to understand what you're saying, ultimately, you don't know who is going to have the need to read that communication. So you always want to write it in a way that anybody would be able to understand it. We also need to take into consideration personality biases. And these are the assumptions we've made about the other party, the sender or the receiver. And biases are always bad. So you want to proactively identify them and do things to address them. Now, Personality biases are most acutely felt in situations where communications lack tone, which I feel is like 90% of communications these days. Text message, email, carrier pigeon, whatever. And in lieu of tone, if we're, not careful, we may insert our personality bias, and that's going to impact how you understand the message. For example, let's say you're texting with someone for whom your personality bias is a snarky person. If you don't check that bias, you will you will read their text messages in your head in a snarky tone, and maybe they don't mean to be snarky this time. Biases limit us from seeing the full picture, and we always want to see the full picture. So limiting what we see and what we understand based on something that keeps us tunnel vision is not good, even if it's about positive things. So just responding to a comment that was posted, it made me think. No, they limit us. Limiting is bad. So all this information goes into your stakeholder engagement plan and your communications management plan, which then become a part of the project management plan. Integrate them in there. And these two things work very closely together because your stakeholder engagement plan is like the who, what, why we engage, while communications becomes the how. Face-to-face meetings, written communications, verbal communications, formal, informal, whatever. And then you've got to, execute the plan. So once we've created them, they should describe the stakeholders in the planned engagement model we're going to be using. And a strategy drives your connection with the project stakeholders, and it needs to do three things. It needs to involve your stakeholders, like each one based on needs, expectations, interests, and potential impact on the project. Should enable the development of appropriate management strategies to engage those stakeholders and then create and maintain relationships between the project team and stakeholders more broadly. Managing stakeholder engagement means checking in to make sure they're getting everything they expect on the project. We want to maintain their involvement in the project and manage anything unexpected that may be happening. Effective stakeholder management can help get the stakeholders better aligned with the project so we can improve their support of the project. Now, ultimately, stakeholder engagement helps stakeholders understand the project goals, benefits, and risks, and see how their contributions support its success. At its core, it's about building and maintaining strong, lasting relationships with anybody involved in the project. However, successful stakeholder relationships aren't just about engaging stakeholders. We also need to build trust. We need to be able to influence them in a positive way. And then the objective of all of this stakeholder identification and analysis is to optimize alignment among your stakeholders' needs, expectations, and your project's objectives. So we're all on the same page across what they need, what they expect, and what we're willing to do. What we're going to do. So as you work with your stakeholders, you need to help them align their needs. So as a leader, openly share information to keep stakeholders informed. We'll want to manage their expectations and help everyone see the bigger picture. So by engaging with others, you gain a deeper appreciation for their needs and their constraints. So a useful tool that we can use is a stakeholder engagement assessment matrix, something we can use to plan and manage engagement through the project. We want to keep our stakeholders fully engaged throughout the project. So a typical stakeholder engagement assessment matrix is just a grid or a chart or spreadsheet that categorizes stakeholders based on your assessment of their current level of engagement and where you want them to be, where you think they need to be for successful engagement. So down the left, we have a list of stakeholders. Across the top in the columns, we have the various levels of potential engagement. And some of the common ones that we see, unaware. And this one always kind of cracked me up because we know that they can impact the project or they're going to be impacted by the project, but they're unaware of the project. But really the easiest thing to fix is tell them about it. They may be, for whatever their personal or professional reasons, might be actively resistant to your project. They may be neutral, so neither resistant nor supportive. They could be supportive, and I think ideally you want everyone supportive of your project because that just makes it easier for you to manage, and some may be actively leading in certain areas. So we use the letter D to show the desired level of engagement, where we think they would be best engaged. And then we use C for the current level, which is what level they're actually at. So we consider plan and actual. And then we'll work with them throughout the project so we can get them to the desired level. And then for the rest of the project, make sure we're maintaining them there. And while ideally you would want to get everyone supportive so it's easier to manage, sometimes just getting your resistors to neutral can be good enough. So now they're no longer actively resisting or causing issues with your project. So teams are typically more productive and driven when they have clear objectives to meet. We can support the team by collaborating to set challenging goals. Now, objective setting can be conducted at the start of a project or a phase of a project. Agile approaches commonly develop goals throughout the project lifecycle, like during iteration planning sessions, where the team sets the targets and the commitments for the current iteration. So we can use management by objectives for projects by getting commitment to the project goals. So individuals on the team are committing to those goals that will ultimately, or they'll commit to goals, their own goals on the project that will ultimately satisfy the project objectives. So everything we do, everything we plan to do, needs to focus on and meet the project objectives. Now, servant leadership is one option to leading the team. You can work with them to help them to understand the project vision, so that way they're going to commit to supporting that vision. And then you need to keep the team focused on delivering value. So prioritize coherence, collaboration, and consensus. And if new team members join, try to integrate them as seamlessly as possible and emphasize shared understanding and project value. So look at new members as bringing new knowledge and fresh motivation to the project. Make sure they understand and they're aligned to both the project goals and any agreements. So we need to review with them, project and team charters. Then we need to understand and support how they add value to the project and manage the possible impact of integrating new people to the project. And really the point of all this is to build trust with your stakeholders and influence them to accomplish your project's objectives. And relationship building is about acknowledging your role as a leader and bringing people together to solve problems, perform work, and share. First and foremost, people need to trust you. Integrity, honesty, fairness, and respect are essential values that all team members you're going to need for all team members, to build trust. These principles guide decisions, especially in challenging situations, and they reflect a commitment to doing what's right. So you should demonstrate the desired behaviors of integrity and fairness. Your choices should also prioritize the common good and commitment to your priorities. They help build trust with your stakeholders. And a lot of these, it's kind of generally relates to our code of ethics: responsibility, respect, fairness, honesty. So responsibility, integrity, I can see it. They guide us anyway. Now, an effective leader leverages that trust to engage and influence stakeholders, as well as to get and maintain the support needed for your successful project. So we are going to take our pause here. I don't know that I can. Give me a second. Maybe there's just a couple of slides. Let me just double check and we can just kind of keep going. Oh, no, yeah, that's going to need a longer conversation. Okay, then. We're going to stop here. So we do have some time left. Does anybody have any questions about anything? Carl, your hand is up.
Yes, quick question. I know we already talked about this before, but I'm not going to be available Thursday, so I need to email you, right? And watch the recording later on. And do I send you an email once I finish the recording?
Yes, because I need the paper trail.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, and then I can, because like when you watch recordings, there's like an electronic paper trail of you viewing. Attending the live set, and where am I going with this? Attending the live sessions, I put on my piece of paper, like I personally attest that you were in the class. Otherwise, we don't really have a paper trail of that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Charles, did you have a question?
Well, just a little further to my comment about biases, you commented that they are always a negative, and I think you can have positive biases. Like I am biased towards trying to be sensitive to, empathetic towards my members if there's something going on. I'm just sort of biased towards that. Or I happen
But
to
that's
know
to
that,
the exclusion of other people. Because
no,
biases
that's not,
limit. I'm just
no,
saying that's what biases do. You're biased toward this.
mm,
Do you see what I'm saying
okay.
though?
You're
Biases.
putting you're putting a connotation in that's common. Everybody looks at biases as negative, but it's an
I'm not saying it's
underlying
negative. I'm saying it's limiting.
inclination. Yeah,
It's
well,
just
yeah,
limiting.
not
And we want to be
necessarily.
broader. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
we want to consider everybody and all impacts, seeing the big picture, seeing across everything. I mean, that's like our job to do that.
I
Biases
agree.
will limit us from doing those things.
I don't think that's true. I think if you have a bias, it doesn't restrict you from appreciating others' attitudes and their points of view. Anyway, never mind. I
Well, it
just
would if you
wanted
had
to.
a bias. It would. And yeah, let's just shut this conversation. We can talk about
Yeah,
it on
yeah,
email
it's
if
all
you
right.
want to.
It's all good.
We're going
It's
to
all good.
agree to disagree as professionals because that's what we do.
Yeah.
And it's not really relevant to the test. So I can't really have an opinion about how you need to think because it's not about the test. But any other questions? Anything related to the information? Because we've barely like touched on communications. We introduced it. That is a big part of what we're going to be talking about in our next session when we come back together, where we're going to finish out lesson 3 and start in on lesson 4. That is my goal when we come back on Thursday. So with that, last call for questions before we go.
I just wanted to ask you, yeah, for next time we should be X. We should be ready to, or go take the focus test on initiating, or no, on Agile font. Yeah, what should we? I
You
guess
do
just
the thing
look at.
that shows up. We've just finished lesson 4 or session 4, excuse me. And after session 4, there are some online tests you need to take, and then there's some pre-reading you need to do. So since you read about the stakeholder performance domain, you're probably going to do a performance domain test of stakeholders.
Thank you.
Yeah, so it kind of reinforces the topic. So, alrighty. I don't see any hands, so I'm going to assume no more questions. So have a great middle of your week, everybody, and we will see you back on Thursday. So bye, everybody.